Good present, actually, for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hey, welcome along everybody. It's Patrick Christie's here covering the 8 p.m. show today and tomorrow as well. Anyway, you won't want to miss it. We've got a compelling and cutting show for you this evening. Now, over the weekend, The Times reported that the government are preparing immigration legislation which will bring Britain's laws to the boundaries of international law, and if it's rejected by the ECHR, then Sunak will happily withdraw. Basically, will we be able to deport migrants quicker, and at what cost? We'll be looking at a Brexit 2.0. I am joined by Stoke-on-Trent North MP Jonathan Gullis. He'll be with me very, very shortly. And today we've had a double whammy of strikes, ambulance staff and nurses coming together to form the largest walkout in the history of the NHS, until probably next week when there'll be the other largest walkout in the NHS's history. Anyway, will you still be banging pots and pans for them, even when they're on the picket line? Or are their demands too high? I will take a deep dive into the details, and I'll be also talking to a nurse and commentator, Sarah Jane Palmer. I wonder whether or not it's time for them to forego some of their gold-plated pensions and have more upfront pay. Remember Liz Truss? One of the many Prime Ministers that we've had over the past few months. Well, she's back, apparently, and she's upset a few of her colleagues after writing an essay for The Telegraph and giving her first interview since her swift and dramatic ousting with The Spectator. Political commentator and GB News presenter Emily Carver joins us later on this. And just to top it all off, the great defining debate of our generation, and I really mean that, it is indeed, and we're at a watershed moment. It's the trans row. Amidst Nicola Sturgeon's crumbling approval rating after flip-flopping more than a pair of flip-flops, who writes this anyway, over whether or not a rapist should be held in a woman's prison, it has emerged that an LGBT staff network, get this, have been advising prisons in England and Wales on where they should send trans inmates. Debbie Hayton will help elucidate on this one. Anyway, don't forget about my favourite part of the show. That's right, that's where you get to give me a right good pummelling. Don't hold back, pummel away, as hard as you like. Send in your pummels to gbnews@gbviews.uk. Basically, ask me any question and I will answer it. Any question and I will answer it. gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's all coming up after the latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening. The top story on GB News tonight, the number of people killed in the Turkey earthquake now reportedly stands at more than 2,700, and that number is continuing to rise. The 7.8 magnitude quake hit in the early hours of the morning and was followed throughout the day by dozens of aftershocks that were almost as strong and that were felt as far away as Cyprus. The epicentre was near the border with Syria, causing widespread damage to buildings and homes. Thousands of people have been injured in both countries. The UK is tonight sending help to the region. It should arrive, we understand, at around 11 o'clock this evening. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, saying the government isn't aware of any British fatalities as yet, but too early to say. We'll keep you up to date on that story throughout the evening. Now, here, the partner of missing mum Nicola Bulley has said it's been a tough time for her daughters. In a statement released today, Paul Ansell says, it's been 10 days now since Nicola went missing, and I have two little girls who miss their mummy desperately and who need her back. Meanwhile, a private underwater specialist team has joined the search for the missing mother of two, focusing on the River Wyre in Lancashire, near where she went missing. Police believe the 45-year-old mum may have fallen in, but her family and friends say there's still no evidence to support that hypothesis. Tens of thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England went on strike today in the biggest walkout in the history of the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing is staging 2 days of strikes in a dispute over pay. Ambulance crews and call handlers will return to work tomorrow, but will restart industrial action on Friday. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says a resolution needs to come through the independent pay review body. The General Secretary of the RCN, Pat Cullen, still thinks nurses aren't being paid fairly.
Nurses deserve and need a decent pay rise. That will boost the economy, not damage the economy, because nurses spend in their local communities. So every NHS worker, including our nurses, deserve a decent pay rise. And here we are in a situation today where this government has chosen to punish the nurses of England instead of getting round a table and talking to me about pay in the same way as they've done in Wales and in Scotland.
And today marks the 16th and final strike day for teachers in Scotland, who also walked out in a dispute over pay. More industrial action is on the horizon after talks failed between the teaching unions and Holyrood. The teachers are demanding a 10% pay rise for their members after the Scottish Government only offered 5%. Now, football club Manchester City has been charged with breaking financial fair play rules by the Premier League. The current league holders have been accused of more than 100 breaches from 2009 to 2018 over the accuracy of their pay and profit information. If found proven, the club could be docked points or even expelled from the top flight. Manchester City issued a statement saying they were surprised and they look forward to the independent review. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Back now to Patrick.
Right, like I said, I've got it all for you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to be, very shortly anyway, talking about Rishi Sunak's new quite unbelievable plans, I think, when it comes to tackling the migrant crisis. I'm also going to be talking about whether or not there is some kind of left-wing economic mafia-style organisation that pulls the strings on our economy in relation to what Liz Truss had to say. And asking that big question about nurses, an uncomfortable question. Yes, you do a wonderful job. I've never saved a life. I'd be terrible in a life-and-death situation. I think we can all agree that. However, should you forego some of your gold-plated pension in order to have more upfront pay, therefore, frankly, saving the taxpayer a bit of wonga? But I want to start in Scotland tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Start in Scotland, but it is an issue that affects us all, and certainly in the future it will affect anyone who is a woman or is thinking about having a daughter. I think we might actually be witnessing the end of Nicola Sturgeon. I think women might be about to bring her down. The polls are damning, and it's all because she's been found out. She can't answer basic questions about gender identity at the same time as asking people to accept a reality that would, in my view, put women and girls in danger. Figures show that there are at least 6 men identifying as women in women's prisons. The trans lobby might call them women, but in my view, if you were born a man, you will die a man, and that is that. They're blokes, and they're in women's prisons. But cop a load of this. It's just been revealed that an LGBT staff network who told civil servants that using phrases like protecting women and girls could be transphobic are part of the Trans Advisory Board in Her Majesty's Prison Services. It's no wonder that Dominic Raab kicked right off with this lot of overly woke numpties, is it? Good on him. The Pride in Prison and Probation Group emailed Ministry of Justice staff and said that using the phrase adult human female, it's a dictionary definition, could be considered coded transphobia. But something really interesting is happening, isn't it? People aren't afraid anymore, I don't think, of being called transphobic. They're just not. They used to be. They definitely used to be. And that's why we've let this madness get this far. But they're not anymore. Because I think people ask themselves the question, do I think a male rapist who identifies as a woman should be allowed in a women's prison? And I think they say, no, I don't. They then ask themselves, should that person be considered a woman and allowed around my kids? I think then they say, no. And then I think that people think, well, if that makes me transphobic, then so be it. And the power of the hysteria evaporates because the lunacy is exposed and people just don't care about offending them anymore. They hadn't banked on this happening, though, had they? And this is now why Nicola Sturgeon is, in my view, toast. Sturgeon's mask has slipped. Of course, unfortunately for all of us, what's behind the mask still looks a lot like Nicola Sturgeon. But she got drunk on her own power. She got drunk on her own popularity. She started seeing the world as black and white, good, progressive woke causes versus everything else is evil. She isn't used to having to really explain herself. She's just used to making indistinct progressive noises and a load of people with blue hair applaud her and then they just all move on, don't they? But then she did something that nobody in their right minds would ever do. Nobody would ever do this. She made the women angry. She made the women very angry. She sought to enact a policy that would unquestionably have put the lives and safety of women and young girls at risk. Sturgeon literally chose to align herself with something like 0.06% of the population instead of around 52% of her population, i.e. women. To be very clear, people like Nicola Sturgeon and SNP grandee Alan Thunderbird Eyebrow Smith want you to allow trans women into prisons and other women's spaces despite, and this is the kicker, not being able to define what a woman is or what a trans person is. What is a woman? They can't answer. What is a trans person? Well, it could be anyone with a feeling. It could be post-op, pre-op, non-binary, pansexual. They just don't know. They don't know. They cannot tell you what a woman is and they cannot tell you what trans is. They look ridiculous. And the receipts are in. Since Sturgeon's trans saga, a YouGov poll showed that support for the SNP in Holyrood elections has fallen to its lowest level in 5 years, while voting intentions for the Westminster elections are at their worst since 2019. The poll showed that Ms Sturgeon's personal approval rating also slipped into negative territory. So from 7%, plus 7% in October, to minus 4%. Meanwhile, support for Scottish independence, and this is the biggie, dropped from 53% to 47%, the lowest level since last spring. This is what happens when you treat the public like idiots. I'm just going to play you a little clip now from SNP rent-a-gob, Alan Smith MP. He talks a big game from behind his own laptop, this guy. He issues strongly worded press releases, no problem with that, has he, at all, and acts tough in front of his own supporters, or by, some would say, being incredibly rude to young women on Question Time. But he doesn't like it up him. Here is what the man who thinks that SNP politicians or supporters who don't support putting male sex offenders in women's prisons has to say for himself when asked a basic question about it.
What's your take on that? Do you think trans people who are convicted of crimes like that should be in women's jails?
I have nothing to say on that.
Well, that's all fair enough, obviously. I mean, Alan Smith raising more than just his own eyebrow there for a change. I don't know how Alan Smith can be so comfortable offending so many women with all of these policies, perhaps. Oh, I don't know. Well, we better not. Alan Smith has made himself look very silly. And then, of course, he did that no-comment interview. No, but seriously, we're right to laugh at Sturgeon and Smith because, well, they're all laughing at us, aren't they? We are at a watershed moment, ladies and gentlemen. The future of women's rights is at stake. The future of society, as we know it, is at stake. Sturgeon and Alan Smith, they wanted their legacy to be an independent Scotland, and actually, their legacy will be that they will be remembered, I suspect anyway, by, well, the vast majority of people, as two deluded grifters on the wrong side of history. Right, so I'm going to be returning to that throughout the course of the show. Get your views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Do you think we're witnessing the end of Nicola Sturgeon? I'm going to be getting stuck into that one later on. But before we get into that, it was reported over the weekend that the government are planning immigration legislation, which will test the bounds of international law. If the legislation is rejected by the European Court of Human Rights, Rishi Sunak is allegedly, I'll believe it when I say it, prepared to trigger the nuclear option and withdraw from the ECHR. The government would then use this as a pledge for the next general election in an effort to appeal to the Brexit voting majority. Joining me now is one man who suggested that we simply ignored the court when they blocked our Rwanda policy. It's the MP for Stoke-on-Trent North. It's Jonathan Gullis. He pulls no punches, which is why he's perfect for this show. Gullis, how are you?
I'm good, my friend. How are you? Good to see you talking all that common sense. That Alan Smith, honestly, it's amazing that his ego and self-importance fits in the Palace of Westminster. I promise you that.
It's remarkable, isn't it? It's absolutely remarkable. Let's veer ourselves slightly back onto the topic we had you on to talk about, though, which is the ECHR initially. From where I'm sitting, Jonathan, I'm not sure Rishi Sunak actually has the bottle to either A, pull us out of it, or B, ignore it.
Well, look, let's wait and see. He's told us that this legislation is coming down the track, which is going to very bluntly say that if you come to this country illegally, you can't claim asylum. Hooray for that! About time too. But he's absolutely right in his thinking that if it goes through our sovereign parliament, if it gets passed through all our domestic courts, and then suddenly we find the ECHR's meddling in it, then guess what? It's time to leave, because the ECHR should have no jurisdiction over our laws and our borders, which we voted very distinctively in 2016 and in 2019 to take back control of. It's as simple as that, Patrick.
You know, it really is. But are there going to end up being ructions within the Conservative Party? Because, let's be honest with you, they don't all necessarily think like you. I would argue that maybe your way of thinking is aligned with the vast majority of the British public. That's anecdotal, but I suspect it is. But unless you can convince members of your own party to think the same way as well, it will look really bad for the Tories, won't it?
Well, look, I hope we avoid the blue on blue that we saw even during the Brexit debates between 2017 and 2019. This is an easy win here for the Conservative Party, because it's delivering, as you say, on the people's priorities, on what the will of the British people was back in 2016 and in 2019. And it's a very clear dividing line between us and the Labour Party, something that I know some voters feel isn't very clear this day and age. A Labour Party who, let's be frank, will just give more money to France, process quicker, aka approve more people coming over, which fuels the smuggling gangs model, and essentially is free movement through the back door. The Labour Party are talking about doing deals with the European Union. Stephen Kinnock, another overinflated, pompous ego, who tells, but doesn't say what red lines that he would be willing to put in place for any deal to be done, aka we're going to basically rejoin the EU. These clowns in the Labour Party can't be trusted, and it's up to the Conservatives to prove that we deserve to have that vote lent to us once again.
Yeah, look, of course, the Labour Party, they say, don't they, hey, we care deeply about this, and we might even introduce things like ID cards. I believe that when I see it. Or the fact that they think that the way to deal with the migrant crisis is to cut the head off the snake and to get rid of these people smuggling gangs. And there is some truth on that. But the fact is we do have a massive backlog of people who have already kind of subverted the human trafficking gangs to a large extent. They've made it to Calais. Jonathan, I was speaking to, I think it's probably a human rights lawyer, actually, earlier on, who was saying to me, well, the point is, if these people are from like, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, whatever, we can't actually deport them, even if we don't think that they should be claiming asylum here, shouldn't be claiming asylum here. To which, to my mind, it re-raised something that people were speaking about a while ago. We do have some islands at our disposal, do we not? Places like Ascension Island, I think, or the Falkland Islands. I mean, would you be dead against, in the face of the crisis that we're facing at the minute, sending people there?
I'm certainly in favour of doing more deals like we've done already with Rwanda, finding those safe third countries to at least process offshoring and inevitably allow people to start a new life in a safe third country. I think that's absolutely the solution to our problems, which is why, Patrick, as you kindly said, I introduced a bill before Parliament just before Christmas last year saying let's just ignore the ECHR, let's crack on, get a plane in the sky and get these people going, because the sooner we show that, the smuggling gangs don't have anything else to feed off in terms of promotional material. At the moment, they do sadly have too much, because obviously we're here talking about the fact we have a crisis. And if we wait for the courts, by the time we get through all the court-making decisions, even in the ECHR might be next March, there'll be 65, 75,000 more people on top of the 40,000.
Well, there will be. Now,
the British public will go bananas.
They will. Now, this is, I think, anyway, one question that I suspect could sink Starmer and co, which is that, let's say you guys manage to get all of this stuff through, right, and that you do bring us out the ECHR, or you manage to get through things where people who come over here by small boat can be told that they're not staying and they haven't got a right to appeal that deportation, and the numbers drop massively. Labour will kick up a huge fuss. They will say, and some would argue rightly, by the way, they will say, well, we're subverting due legal process and this is against people's human rights. What I think is fascinating, Jonathan, is if the numbers drop and the public are happy, do you reckon Labour would repeal that if they got into power next? Because I don't think they would.
I don't trust the Labour Party one bit. I'm sure they'd find some way of watering it down slowly but surely over time if they got in power. And I actually think that they would say it's against people's human rights. I think it's inhumane to allow people to keep crossing the English Channel. I think it's the humane thing to do everything we can to stop people risking their lives unnecessarily, putting thousands of pounds in the hand of smuggling gangs and turning that English Channel into a watery grave. The humane thing to do is to say to people, there is no need to come here. And if you do come here, like you say, Patrick, you're going to not be hanging around. You'll be off to Rwanda or wherever else. And the Labour Party, I don't trust them at all. Keir Starmer sits on so many fences. B&Q have run out now. So I don't think that guy can be trusted with anything. And when you see Stephen Kinnock, who's desperate to be part of the EU, Peter Kyle, who literally fantasises about the European Union on a daily basis, I'm sure, then these are the clowns that I don't even want to see anywhere near our government, because if they do, slowly but surely, bit by bit, they'll reverse Brexit, and then we'll come to realise that all too late, sadly.
Can I ask you a slightly personal question, if that's all right? Because you and I have numerous robust conversations on shows like this, and I do hear you on other media outlets as well. Now, you really do not hold back, and you must be aware that some people vehemently disagree with what you're saying, right? Do you not care? Do you just have unflinching self-belief in the fact that history will judge you correctly? Because, I mean, it takes cojones, mate.
Well, all I would say is when I go out and about door knocking around Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and talk, I feel like I'm the wet, to be quite honest with you. I'm the one that has the softer views probably than some of my own constituents. And look, whilst I might live in a household where sometimes it's hard to find someone who agrees with me on my views and within my own family, I'll just say that when I'm out and about and I'm hanging out with my mates like Lee Anderson and others, and we're talking to people, not getting caught up in the Westminster bubble, I'm not on Twitter, so I don't have to worry about upsetting some faux outrage celebrity who's desperate for some likes and retweets, then I can crack on. And yeah, look, I think in time I'll be judged to be on the right side of this. But I think, look, at the end of the day, people want politicians to actually, say what they think and actually stand for the people that they represent.
That is, you at least say what you think, and people can agree with it or disagree with it, but at least they know where you stand categorically. Jonathan, thank you very much, as ever. Jonathan Gullis there, who is, of course, the Tory MP for Stoke-on-Trent North. Right, now, a Downing Street official has said that there are no plans to withdraw from the ECHR and that we will set out the policy details fairly soon, so they will be able to see for themselves an approach we believe both fundamentally deals with this ongoing issue, which is one of both fairness and safety, but also remains compliant with the ECHR. Look, ladies and gentlemen, this is full regulatory alignment yet again, isn't it? We got out of the European Union, then chose to basically still try to adhere to the vast majority of EU rules and regs. How did that turn out for us? We're doing it again. That was Jonathan Gullis there, as I've said, Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent North. Right, OK, so coming up, Liz Truss has made her first debut in the media after stepping down as Prime Minister. We will be discussing this with political commentator and GB News presenter Emily Carver. Pop the kettle on. I will see you in just a few.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back. It's Patrick Christie's here. Now, so many of you have been getting in touch. I asked you, as Sunak is reportedly considering withdrawing from the ECHR, should we have a referendum on the matter? So, loads of you got in touch, and this one is from Russell. Don't recall having a referendum about joining the ECHR, so we don't need permission to leave it. Well, it's interesting. I mean, one of the slightly unfortunate arguments, of course, when it comes to leaving the ECHR is that people like Winston Churchill, a true, proper national treasure and hero, despite what the modern wokies might tell you about him, he was banging in favour of it. And I get all of that. And then they go, oh, OK, well, look, if you leave it, then you'll be the same as Russia or Belarus. Now, don't let anyone say that to you, because we won't be, because we're not Russia or Belarus, OK? There's loads of those countries that are like that don't share anything like the same norms and values and rules of law. The argument for them hinges on the idea that if we suddenly decided to leave the ECHR, we would, by definition, of our own free will, choose to become a tyrannical dictatorship. Well, it's nonsense, isn't it? It's a little bit like the workers' rights stuff, when it was like, oh, when you vote to leave the European Union, if you want to diverge from food standards or workers' rights, oh, well, it didn't just mean we were all going to deliberately give each other salmonella and start standing on the throats of the poor, did it? Anyway, Colin said, we had one. We voted to leave the EU, all of it, not just bits. Yeah, Colin, get your point. The ECHR, not the EU, but I do take what you mean. And I think, realistically, if people had that on the ballot paper as well, I think we all know what leaving the EU for a lot of people meant. And it did. For a lot of people, for pretty much everyone who voted to leave the EU, it did mean that a judge from some far-flung European country should not have a say over who we can and can't deport from our own country. That's unequivocal. So I take your point, Colin, although slightly factually inaccurate, but there we go. We're all friends here. Stephen says, one side will only complain that the side with the most votes were lied to. I see what you do. And those sore because they didn't get what they wanted would take it to court. Sound familiar? Brexit all over again. Yes, I suspect you're possibly right. Right, one final one, quick one. Red. Is that right, Brad? Well done you on a fantastic name. Red says, they're always considering, planning, discussing, never actually doing. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Although on this one, I'm trying to figure out exactly what Rishi Sunak's going for, because he said, I'll stop the boats. That's pretty definite, OK? His own Home Secretary has come out and said, if we don't do that, we're toast, which is right. And then on top of that as well, he said things like, I'm going to reduce the asylum seeker backlog. In fact, I'm going to reduce it to 0. Flipping heck, there's a bit of jeopardy there, isn't there, Richie? Because if you don't do that, what happens? Well, you're out. But then I suppose, if they're out, who do you get in? Labour. And, well, do they really care about stopping the boats? They would say they do. Others would say not. Moving on. Liz Truss's first interview since leaving office was published today with Spectator TV. And perhaps the real standout line was, I didn't get everything right. Yeah, perceptive. Anyway, I think may be inclined to agree, but perhaps for different reasons. Now, the liberal media saw Liz Truss as a shill for the rich, someone who hated the poor, was economically illiterate, and a purveyor of so-called trickle-down economics. So hearing her say she didn't get everything right has probably prompted a few scoffs from that crowd. But bear in mind, during those chaotic couple of weeks, and it was really just a couple of weeks, wasn't it, practically none of the Truss agenda, Trussonomics, had been implemented. In fact, none of it, really. None of it had actually really happened. Remember when the pound plummeted the day after we voted to leave the European Union and everyone blamed Brexit? Well, Brexit didn't take place for another 2.5 years after that. It was all just a matter of trust and perception. Was Liz Truss's biggest mistake, in fact, failing to sell her vision to the public and the market? I suspect it was. Joining me now to discuss this is Conservative Home columnist and GB News presenter, Emily Carver. Emily, how are you?
Good evening, I'm very well.
Right, good, just as well. OK, so was Liz Truss really brought down by some kind of big left-wing economic cabal?
Well, that's what she said in her very long essay, 4,000 words in the Sunday Telegraph, and she's repeated it again in her interview with Spectator TV. She thinks that she was not only dealt a difficult hand, but that it was also near impossible for her to implement what she wanted to do. And there may well be some truth to that. She blames the OBR for being very static with their models and forecasts, and that they pushed her into having to give up her plans for the economy. But I must say, she wants to reinvigorate her image as the voice of free market economics, and I'm not sure whether she's the right person to do it, because in her mini budget, she announced huge amounts, or prior to it, she announced huge amounts of public spending. Then she immediately announced huge tax cuts. Now, anyone who knows free market economics will know that it's rather important to address how you're going to get the deficit down and public spending down if you're going to then have room for tax cuts. So I think...
Can I just interrupt you there, Emily? I'm just taking advantage of one of the few times I'm allowed to do it, actually. But just on this, are you, as a Conservative, a believer in free markets and low taxes, high growth society, are you actually quite angry at Liz Truss for messing it up? Because now it's kind of kicked it into the long grass, hasn't it?
Well, this is the thing. It's all rather depressing because people are now saying that free market economics has been tried, it's failed, much like communism always fails when it's tried. People are comparing the two. I think that's terribly unfair, but I would agree with perhaps some of those voices to say that Liz Truss perhaps should have taken a little more time to think about what went wrong, because it seems from her long essay in the Telegraph and the interview that she hasn't quite realised that she got things wrong. There's a lot of blaming on other people. She clearly didn't understand how fragile the markets were at that moment. She clearly didn't understand a lot of things, and she certainly didn't get her own side on side, and that's rather important if you want to be Prime Minister. However, I do think it may be a good thing if this reinvigorates some kind of debate around economics, because most people will be looking at what Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are doing and thinking, well, that ain't very good either.
It does undoubtedly, I think, though, point to something quite concerning, very concerning for people. We do live in an age now where people are more able than ever to look underneath the bonnet of society in different aspects of it, and also really seriously question things. And I wonder whether or not she exposed the dogmatic orthodoxy of the people who have a vice-like grip on arguably not just our nation, but the world's economic setup. And actually, that's not necessarily a great thing, is it? It doesn't really leave much wiggle room for someone who's an out-of-the-box thinker or who looks at a specific situation, maybe a specific economic situation like Liz Truss did, and think, OK, I'm going to put something radical out here, but I think this is what needs to be done in this time. And that's a concern for me, because who's running the world then, you know?
Well, that's the thing. She says that the OBR essentially wouldn't have allowed her to do anything radical. She says government officials also, and indeed people in her own party, wouldn't allow her to be radical. And the irony, of course, of all this is that people on the left might say, oh, that's not true, that's conspiracy. But hang on, if Jeremy Corbyn had got into power, he certainly wouldn't have been able to do the things he wanted to do if those officials had been in charge. So I do agree with her to some extent that the economic establishment was very much stacked against her and didn't agree with what she was trying to do, the supply side reforms, the tax cuts, etc. We've had years of public spending going up, taxes going up too. She was trying to hit the reverse button and take us in a completely different direction, and computers said no.
Yeah, indeed. Look, well put. Thank you very much, Emily. Great to have you on the show. Emily Carver there, GB News presenter, Conservative Home columnist as well. Coming up now, we have seen the largest strike in the history of the NHS today. You may be forgiven for thinking that this is a show from last week when we also had the largest strike in NHS history, or was it the week before? It's all rolling into one. Anyway, we're going to be joined by one of its employees to take a further look. Nurse and commentator Sarah Jane Palmer is here with me in the studio, and that, ladies and gents, is next.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Laurence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Now, today marks the biggest strike action in the history of Britain, as tens of Britain's NHS, as tens of thousands of NHS workers took to the picket lines. Now, the government are continuing to stick by their consensus that the union's demands are unaffordable. But what we didn't know was that the government pay 3 times the money into NHS pensions than the average in the private sector. So today, The Spectator, again, a lot of shouts out today, The Spectator, aren't there? Writes that if the government was to take money out of the generous payments scheme, pensions payment, then basically they could pay more up front in a salary to nurses, couldn't they? And frankly, I suspect that might be a bit of a win-win. But here to talk through the feasibility of this idea is registered nurse and commentator Sarah Jane Palmer. Sarah Jane, thank you very much. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
Fantastic, yes, indeed. Right, well, let's just deal with that issue first. So, I was reading with some interest earlier on in The Spectator about the fact that nurses do get a great pension. So, if the average salary, it's important to stress, is around 35 grand.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if you added the pension to that, it's around £62,000. Do you think there should be some wiggle room there? And they go, well, all right, we'll take a bit less of a pension payment and we'll have more money up front.
Yeah, I think so, because really a lot of young nurses are coming into the profession, they're not earning a great deal, and they're currently contributing about 10 to 12% in this pension, but they're not going to see that until they're in their 60s, and that's not much interest to them right now in this cost of living crisis, and with the real terms cut that they obviously have faced with their pay anyway. So I think it'd be quite reasonable for the pension to be adjusted somewhat, and then they could have a bit more money. Otherwise, you've got loads of nurses that are actually opting out completely of the pension scheme. Then that puts them at risk financially much later on in their lives.
Exactly. See, this is the thing. And there will be a lot of people out there watching this now or listening to it on radio who go, well, maybe they're freelance, so they don't have a fixed pension scheme. I mean, frankly, I don't mind saying this. It's only quite recently that I've had some kind of pension scheme, right? Certainly nothing like the percentage of the nurses either, I will point out. But you don't hear the unions, do you? Those people there on the picket lines bellowing, saying, look at this, you know, the nurses there, they can't afford food. But actually, they are getting quite a lot in pension payments. And in fact, the pensions that this country's taxpayer owes to all public sector workers is around £2.3 trillion, which is, by the way, the size of Britain's economy.
Yeah, that's...
So do you think in that context, do you think that nurses are getting unfairly treated, or does the country not value them?
Well, I think the country absolutely values them, but what it is we've got this situation with the economy where everybody's had a real terms cut, not just the nurses. So I don't really think it's the nurses that are being treated unfairly. Everyone feels treated unfairly, but it is the situation with the economy. And I think there's a lot of things about being a nurse that are great, like the pension deal that they have is particularly good. And they did get some rise this year. Some people haven't had any pay rise at all. And in a few months' time, there'll be the next pay review. So, I mean, I think if they were patient and didn't strike, then they might find that the pay review would be quite reasonable. And then you'd save all this harm that's being caused to patients while people...
Well, just on that, I mean, I actually was doing a show earlier on, and there was a lady on a picket line there whose own mother had to call an ambulance that day and had been taken to the hospital where this woman who was a nurse was picketing outside. And she was still picketing outside. No. And I looked at it and I thought, well, each to their own. But if my mum was in hospital and I was medically trained...
Yeah, you just want to be there.
I'd be at the bedside.
Absolutely.
And I thought... Maybe some of these people have been a bit indoctrinated?
Yeah, I think so. I think the RCN has a lot to... I think that the RCN is responsible for creating this narrative, and then you've got a lot of, particularly mainly like the young nurses all clubbing together excitedly outside the hospitals on the picket lines. But I think people are missing the moral point here, and there's a moral value to nursing. When you go into nursing, you know, like I always knew that it would be hard work and I wouldn't get much money, but that it would be a decent pay. And I always was told, oh, the pension scheme's really good. There are different things about being a nurse that make it great. It's not all about the money. And I do think that how can you leave someone suffering? You know, you should be there looking after your patients. And the people they've replaced the nurses with are mostly agency, and that's a bit of a risk as well because they don't know the patients or the ward very well.
And often it's much more expensive. It's more expensive.
Yeah.
One of the other big ones that people raise with me, so union leaders or nurses or whatever, is they say, well, if we can afford to pay MPs, I think it's 89 grand a year, around that. How can you possibly say that an MP is worth more than a nurse? Your views?
Well, I would say an MP, I mean, they're a member of Parliament and they're doing a lot of work for a whole constituency. So, I mean, you can't really compare them to a nurse. It's different. And what they're earning is really only about double what a nurse gets anyway. And they're in charge of a whole constituency. Whereas a nurse is on a ward, hopefully, with other nurses and all doing the same job and working as a team. I do think the pay should be higher in an ideal world.
I agree,
I mean, it's a difficult situation, really.
No, and I think the vast majority of people out there, the vast majority, would be in favour of some, especially in the economic climate at the minute, some form of pay rise for nurses. And I think people, by the way, definitely would be in favour of whopping great big pay rises for care workers.
Oh, absolutely.
Who do not appear to be out on strike in force, as far as I can tell.
No.
But I think when
they're the most underpaid.
I can't help but feel, yeah, they are. And I can't help but feel as well when some people start shouting very quickly about how we need a total restructuring of our economic system, i.e. rampant socialism or Marxism, that's where people tend to lose the argument a little bit. But can I just say thank you very, very much for coming in. Great to have you back on the show. It's been a little while. Good to see you. That is Sarah Jane Palmer, there, registered nurse and, of course, commentator. Interesting, really. I think put a bit of chlorine in the water of the old nurses debate, isn't it? But coming up next, Sturgeon's approval. Yes, now I did a monologue on this earlier on, so I hope you've been all emailing in and getting your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Sturgeon's approval rating is waning. In the wake of self-ID in Scottish prisons, it comes as news that an LGBTQ staff network called PIP is advising on prisons in England and Wales, basically saying who should and should not be in prisons. It's fascinating stuff. I will be joined by transgender woman and teacher Debbie Hayton. That's all to come. I'll see you in a few.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christie's here. Now, at the start of the show, I was talking about the trans row and how Nicola Sturgeon's approval rating has plummeted over how she dealt with a male rapist being held in a women's prison. And now it's emerged that an LGBT staff network is advising on prisons in England and Wales, basically saying that they shouldn't use certain phrases like adult human female or women's only spaces, etc., because it might be transphobic. Here to discuss this with me is the teacher and journalist Debbie Hayton. Debbie, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Patrick. Good to be with you again.
Yes, very nice to be with you again. Right, OK, I always struggle to know exactly where to start with these discussions. So, if I just play a bit of devil's advocate here and go, in light of what's been going on in Scotland, Sturgeon's approval ratings obviously have plummeted. In fact, the case in the polls for Scottish independence has fallen as well, which I think is remarkable. But do some of these groups, like the group PIP, that is advising the government on how essentially not to be transphobic when it comes to sending people to prison, do they just want to protect trans rights?
Well, I'm not sure what they're wanting to protect, but they seem to have so much power. And the government, the Ministry of Justice, goes to these groups to ask for advice, where, quite frankly, if we want to know the difference between men and women, we've always known the difference between men and women. There's been nothing new in the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. There is male and female. We are two sexes. And the problem is that the people who should be making policy are abdicating that responsibility to decide the difference between men and women to these activist groups.
When it comes to issues like this, it is always an absolutely whopping great big minefield that some people tread across with much more ease than others. I am not always one of those people, I must say. When it comes to women's prisons and women's spaces, do you think that the only people who should really have a say on the matter are people who were born women?
Yes, women's prisons are for women. I think we need to look at the prison system not as two equal populations, a men's population and a women's population. The prison population is almost entirely men. It's 96% men. Women are a vulnerable and minority group within the prison population, so we house them separately from the male population. And if trans women are also a vulnerable group, we house them separately as well. But to say that trans women are women and we should treat them in exactly the same way, that's where we go wrong.
David, look, I hope you don't mind me asking this. I think it's important for people who maybe haven't necessarily seen you and I have conversations like this on TV shows before. What do you identify as? What's your story, as it were?
Identify as a human being, actually, but that's not what you want. That's not what you wanted to hear, I guess. I was born male. I am male. I've always been male. I transitioned 11 years ago now in order to help me get through a mental health crisis at the time. Didn't mean I was a woman. I thought I might have been a woman. I thought I was a woman at the time, but I've since learned that that was nonsense. So I'm me. I identify as a human being. I get on with life.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think a lot of people will be really interested in that, frankly. I've got to ask now, do you think that trans women would be vulnerable in a men's prison?
I think you've got to look at somebody who, especially somebody who's had gender surgery, to put somebody in the main prison population is probably going to cause chaos in a prison. In a prison of hundreds of men locked up together, to put somebody in there who has been through a process of surgical gender reassignment is probably going to cause issues. I think we can accept that.
Yeah.
So I am part of a vulnerable group. And as part of a vulnerable group, the status would have a duty of care. And that duty of care would mean holding me probably separately to the main male population. But it doesn't mean holding me with women who are a different group.
Yes, indeed. And can I just ask, look, how would you personally feel about if, fingers crossed, obviously this question never arises, Debbie, but if people were saying that you should be sent to a women's prison, what would you make of that?
Well, I shouldn't be, and we all cross our fingers every time we go out in the car, Patrick. It only takes one momentary lapse of concentration when you're driving a car to end up in prison, and that can happen to any of us. And so, I'm very careful when I drive, but secondly, I wouldn't be calling to be placed in a women's prison. It wouldn't be right.
Do you find it slightly strange that Nicola Sturgeon, just from a purely political angle now, has chosen to die on a hill that appears to be populated by around 0.0 whatever of the population, as opposed to possibly over half of the population, i.e. people who are naturally born women? Do you find that bizarre as a political strategy?
Yeah, it's going from bad to worse for Nicola Sturgeon. She's been taking advice from the wrong people. The right people have been trying to advise her, but she's been ignoring them for years, taking advice from a narrow group of people who the Scottish Government is actually paying for the advice it gets back. And meanwhile, the rest of Scottish society, the rest of the people in Scotland, are looking at this thinking, "What on earth is going on here?" It's been described as the poll tax moment. Perhaps it's another analogy might be Brexit, where where David Cameron's government had taken advice from a narrow group of people and not looked out beyond that at what the wider public was thinking.
All right, look, Debbie, thank you very much, as ever, Debbie Hayton there. Right, OK, now we contacted the MOJ for a comment, and they supplied us with this full statement. A single PIP representative sits on the Transgender Advisory Board, a group that is over 30 members strong, holding views of a broad range. There you go. Right, there we are. That's all of that. Now, I believe Dan Watson is coming up next. Make sure it's a rip-roaring of a show as well. I've got to go to your weather first, though.
Evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Temperatures are dropping out there across England and Wales. A frosty start tomorrow morning. Some fog also likely. Further north, frost and fog not such a problem because it is going to be cloudier. This big area of high pressure has been dominating our weather, but it's just edging away to the east, allowing this weather front to come into the northwest, bringing outbreaks of rain across the Western Isles through this evening.